hazards and obstacles. My name is Tim Solms. I'm the president of AFCEA's Washington, D.C. chapter. I'm also the vice president at Juniper Networks for Federal. I want to welcome you here today and kick off this morning's symposium on mobility. Just a little bit about, not hitting the microphone when you talk, a little bit about the chapter. We serve the Washington, D.C. area, primarily focused in the areas of information technology, and as it intersects with both industry, academia, and the federal government. Today's conference on mobility tends to be one that has a much larger draw. They must be out in the looking at the exhibits right now. But this is the second one that we've done this year. The first one we actually did in cooperation with Mr. Halverson, the DoD CIO, who asked us to facilitate that on his behalf. We got tremendous feedback from that as we were looking to pull into this symposium, and we're going to be bringing some of that feedback and information into what we're doing today. So hopefully you'll find it relevant and interesting, and will spend the day with us in spite of weather that we've had and will have. Couple things also about the chapter, and we are looking to really sort of champion a couple of causes this year as we're about halfway through our year and strategy. We're really looking at our ability to sort of make sure that we're talking about disruptive technology, and that's the real thing that I want to sort of key on this morning. Mobility is key, but really if we all know we're in a mobile-first world. If we're going to have relevant technology, it has to be developed for and applicable to the mobile market. But mobile-first also translates to cloud-first. So cloud, much more than a place for core IT, applications, storage. It is the mobility of that data that allows us to use those devices in our personal life, in our home life, as they branch out and get their fingers into Internet of Things and work the big data and machine learning piece that makes the information that we have relevant. And those are a couple of things that we're going to hear keyed in on today. So we've put together a great agenda. I'll keep it short so we can help sort of catch up on time. And I'd like to introduce Mr. Randy Clark, who's the chairman for today's symposium. Randy?
Thanks, Tim. Well, good morning, and I appreciate everyone's effort to attend. I know that traffic was an issue last night, certainly. I looked at Google Maps, and there were over 90 accidents in Washington, D.C., and every road in the Beltway was red, so that was quite the snapshot. So, as Tim mentioned, my name is Randy Clark. I'm the chairman of the Mobile Working Group. I'm a founding member of the working group. Our mission is to establish a collaborative environment to provide an ethical exchange of information between industry and government. And we've been very successful in doing that over the last couple of years. And it's important because the only way that we can help the warfighter is to bring innovation and disruptive technology to the forefront and meet the specialized requirements of the DoD. The way we set up the symposium is based on true collaboration, right? So each one of these panels, from disruptive technology to the application ecosystem to IoT, ISR and robotics to tactical mobility, was a collaboration between a government sponsor and an industry sponsor that built the content and of course, selected the panelists. So I'm very proud of the content that's going to be delivered today. It's not a retread of anything we've ever talked about. It's all new information and educational. So I think the government as well as industry will find a great deal of value. I read an article the other day in Business Insider that said that we're in the fourth revolution. And it defined the revolutions pretty simply, right? The first one was computing. The second one was the internet. The third one was mobility. And now that mobility is becoming saturated from a market perspective. The fourth one is robotics. And robotics fundamentally is leveraging all three of the former revolutions, right? Computing, the internet, and mobility. And you're going to see some technology that exemplifies that today. So with that said, I'm going to make a couple of housekeeping announcements. First of all, I'd like to thank AirWatch for being our breakfast sponsor this morning. In addition, we have premier sponsors like Samsung and AirWatch being a diamond sponsor, HP, Red Hat, and Citrix. Without their assistance, both in the steering committee informing the content, but also their sponsorships and their exhibits in the hallway, these events aren't possible. So I want to thank all of the sponsors for their contribution, both in time and in dollars, to help support the forum. Secondly, I want to make sure that you're aware of the technology showcase that's in the foyer area. In your collateral information, there's a passport you can get stamped. There'll be prizes, raffles at the end. Once again, thanks to the sponsors for providing that information. Thirdly, Samsung also is sponsoring our happy hour. At the end of the day, that'll precede the event. It'll be in the exhibit area, so you don't have to move. That's a great benefit. We've asked most of our panelists and government people to try to hang out as long as possible so you get an opportunity to speak with them in a casual environment. Lastly, after each keynote and every panel, there'll be a short Q&A session. In order for you to submit your questions to Q&A, you have to email questions at dc.fceachapters.org. That information is also in your collateral. So with that said, I'd like to get started by introducing Dave Harris, DoD account executive at VMware and AirWatch. Sir?
Randy.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank Randy Siegel for making this all possible. Randy, step out here and wave your hand. Come on.
Hey, Dave, thank you.
Sure thing.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for
Hi.
being here early, everyone. We know that, the traffic is bad, so thanks.
Great.
Thanks, Dave.
My name is David Harris again, and I represent VMware's end-user computing and AirWatch sales organizations. And for our first presentation this morning, I'd like to introduce Air Force Major General Sarah Zabel. General Zabel is the Vice Director of the Defense Information Systems Agency. In this role, she helps lead a global organization of military, civilian, and contract personnel who plan, develop, deliver, and operate joint, interoperable command and control capabilities and a global enterprise infrastructure in direct support of the President, Secretary of Defense, Joint Chiefs of Staff, combatant commanders, Department of Defense components, and other mission partners across the spectrum of operations. Major General Zabel leads the efforts of an 8,000-member global organization and manages a $10 billion annual budget. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Major General Zabel.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm actually kind of surprised to see anybody here today. I think that most people are probably still doing their commute home from last night. There was, coming down 295, there was just so many cars at the side of the road. It looks like it was just awful. So, of course, we'll get off to a slightly later start this morning than what we had planned, but it is truly my pleasure to be your first speaker, to be able to start off this great summit event about mobility, because mobility and enabling a mobile workforce in the Department of Defense, this is a big area in which we work, in which we really need to go, and we have a lot of distance to cover to actually mobile enable the department. I've had a cell phone of some sort in order to help me do my job probably about 20 years now. And the first one, of course, was simply a phone. I mean, which was great. It was nice to walk around and be able to make and receive calls. But then, later on, through the magic of BlackBerry, when we actually had phone and email, that was a huge step forward. But that seems to be about as far as we've gotten in a lot of ways. We have phone and email in better and smaller and faster packages now, but it's still kind of phone and email. And when you look at, okay, what's holding us back? What does it take to truly enable a mobile workforce? You got to look at what we started with, where we've come from, and the fact that in order to truly have a mobile-enabled workforce, you need to want it, to demand it, and to think mobile in order to bring all the different elements together. We have so many practices, habits. I mean, in the military services, we have traditions that go back. I think the Navy just celebrated its 240th birthday. So these traditions and the way we do things, they go back a long, long time to a world in which mobility was never envisioned. And so we have practices, we have ways of working, we have rules and laws that speak to how we did things in the past. And it was very relevant in the past, it's still relevant, but it fails to take advantage of where we could be with mobility. several years ago, I was a colonel, and I had a chance to take a national security course in Syracuse University. It was a great course. Colonels and one-stars brought together from all the different services. And part of the course was a 2-day exercise. We were over in a camp over in the Finger Lakes region of New York State, and beautiful area. And we had set up. I was on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. There's also a Secretary of Defense and the President and his National Security Advisor. All these different organizations were scattered around the encampment, and we were either managing or creating some sort of world crisis. I don't remember what it was. They gave us some students from Syracuse in order to, help the students learn how people like us operate and think, and to help us, get our jobs done. So since we were in these little, spots just on the encampment, we weren't set up with any sort of real infrastructure. So our students became runners. And I can remember on that first morning, we're getting all our plans together, and we sent our runner out here, go take this to the SecDef. And yep, she went out, took it to the SecDef. But after about an hour, we looked around, and our runner was just sitting in the corner. And so we had some really important message. So we sent somebody over there to say, go, run. You're a runner, go run. And he came back and told us, actually, she's texting. So you can imagine those young kids. I mean, they're great young kids. Somebody tells them, take this message and go run over there. They do it. But pretty soon they got together and said, why are we doing this? And just traded phone numbers so that they could text these messages to each other, which was a much better way of operating. We didn't lose our runner for 10 minutes at a time. We got messages out faster. It was more reliable. But you can imagine when the guy came back and said, yeah, she's texting, we were all going, oh, we just didn't think about it. A runner runs. That's why they call it a runner. There are so many ways in which it's not only our habits, but our infrastructure, our applications, everything is built for a world that did not envision mobility. So what does it take to go from where we are now and go to a mobile-enabled workforce for the Department of Defense? It takes a lot of things. So I'm going to talk to you about some devices, applications, infrastructure components, business systems and processes, security, policy. Those are some of the really important elements, all of which have to advance, have to change to be mobile-enabled. So let's start with devices. Every job I've been in, I take whatever device they give me and I just live with it. But some people have very definite emotional responses to, it is a personal, helpful device, so they either love it or they hate it. I mean, for me, I had BlackBerries a lot, and it's kind of annoying when, it keeps on pocket dialing itself, and you take it out of your pocket and it says, do you really want to assign blah, 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 to the P key? And no, I really don't, so thank you for asking. I've got this Apple device now, this iOS, which it's great, it's very useful, but I tell you, the spell checker is overly aggressive. I've been signing emails with my initials S-E-Z, and it keeps changing it to sexy. I've found the change, and I've corrected each time. And when I texted a friend that I had been actually frocked to this rank of Major General for a while, for a couple of months before I actually, earned it and was paid for it, it was just improper with how Apple interpreted, my message. And I've got this nightmare image in my mind where my face appears on the news someday, hey, and it says, General Officer sends an email to her entire staff inviting them to an effing ceremony and, calling herself sexy. And it's like, oh, no. So, and if that ever happens, by the way, it's not me, it's the phone, It's the phone. So what we need to have, though, is we need to respect the fact that people, these are personal devices, and there are a lot of varieties out there, and they bring new capabilities. They're very competitive. It's a very competitive market out there. So if we want to have new capabilities coming into our world at a reasonable pace, then we need to be able to manage some level of diversity here. We need to have a limited bring-your-own-device and be able to live with that world. So that means that implies that we're going to have to be able to, be able to bring a device into our fold, make sure that we're happy with its security posture, with what it's providing, its capabilities, that we're able to live with it and manage that. But that's going to be something that we need to keep on learning how to do that. Now, of course, underlying anything that we do to approach mobility, anything in the military, we have to have an underlying security basis that that really protects the information and the missions and the business processes that we're responsible for. So one of the areas in which we've been working for quite a while is to have derived credentials. Now, of course, with the early BlackBerries, I don't know if any of you had the BlackBerry with the sled. And the sled was a CAC sled. It's a separate device, about the size of a pack of cards. And you put your CAC in there, and that way you can send and receive signed and encrypted emails. So that's good when it actually was, paired and working. And there was quite a complicated series of steps in order to have them paired up and working. So it's nice to send and receive signed encrypted emails, but the difficulty of just using that sled and the cumbersome, okay, now I have to have two things, that was just kind of hard to work with. It's still hard to work with. So we've been working towards derived credentials where we do not have to have a CAC sled device. It's the DoD PKI solution with an over-the-air ability to enterprise-wide to have the certificates from my CAC card on the phone. I can send and receive signed and encrypted emails and get onto many CAC-enabled websites, not all of them yet. So I have one of the early pilot forays into this, and it's been so successful. We've learned a lot, and we've been able to move forward with what we're calling purebred. Purebred, we've been able to work in partnership with NSA, with NIAP, the National Information Assurance Partnership, led by NSA with NIST, and NSA's Commercial Solutions for Classified, and bring this over-the-air PKI, DoD PKI-enabled derived credentials system that we are going to be able to, we're piloting and burning in February and March, and basically through the spring, we're going to be able to roll this out to our iOS devices first, but then later we're going to be able to, towards the summer, we're going to be able to move on to the Samsung Android devices and the BlackBerry devices. So that's a great start to a security posture for this. However, we know that there needs to be more. If you're going to do security, if you're going to use apps on your phone, then you need to be able to make sure that the apps they've been vetted. You know how they behave. You have some sort of continuous monitoring, security monitoring, and cyber tools on this, so that if something happens, you can find out, you can do remediation, you can respond to it, bearing in mind that there's a lot of time that these mobile devices, by their nature, they spend a lot of time disconnected from the rest of the world, from their mothership, and you still have to have this sort of security on there. So this is something. These are some of the areas where we have to keep on progressing, and we've got certainly steps in place, and we're moving forward on that. But it's one of those areas where we really need for technology and for industry to be pushing forward. Speaking of applications, in the future, what we need in order to continue to mobile enable the department, we need federated app stores, and like I said, apps vetting and apps reputation. We have the potential to have so many creative entities bring good products forward. However, sometimes creative entities are not good creative entities, sometimes they are bad creative entities. So what we need to be able to do is we need a federated app store, so anyone in the Department of Defense can, or in the federal government, can be able to get to applications created, for their use, for the things that we need to do, as well as government off-the-shelf or commercial off-the-shelf applications. But like I said, we need to make sure that we are doing vetting so that we know what we're running, we know what's happening on our mobile device. Also, reputation services and monitoring security tools on those applications. Now, one of the areas in which we are stuck with our past is in accessing legacy applications and legacy data. These systems, you can't blame the people who invented the systems 25, 30 years ago for not mobile enabling, not creating an app for their system. But it means that now, as we're trying to move forward, we're stuck with systems from the past, and they are not, they're not enabled, and they're certainly not optimized to be used on a mobile device. I mean, some of our business processes are so old. In the Air Force, we still have a product that we use in our personnel systems, and it's particularly in assignment systems, we call a RIP. And a RIP refers to the fact that you go to the printer where all that green and white fanfold paper with the perforated edges is scrolling up, and you rip it off the printer. So imagine explaining that business process to a young airman these days when they're looking at you and wondering, why are we printing something? Give up the fact that they don't even realize, why someone would rip something off the printer. So these are some of the business processes and some of the types of applications that we still use today. And so this keeps us in the world where I can walk around with a phone and with email, but that's it. I'm not mobile enabled through this device. And we don't seem to be working at a earth-shattering pace to actually get to that mobile enablement. There is just a lot to do. When we consider the infrastructure components, so I said I can walk around with this phone. I can go and park in the Pentagon parking lot, walk into the building. Pretty soon, my phone loses its signal because I've got tons and tons of concrete and steel over me. And as I walk through the building, I'm going to hit so many areas where this does not help me do anything to do my job. Paperweight, ooh, very good, but nothing else. So that speaks to a bit of the infrastructure problem. We have so many blind spots where a mobile device cannot communicate. We have so many areas where, the blind spots might be out in a Air Force base or an Army post somewhere, and sometimes they tend to be way out there, with no cell towers, no nothing, in order to provide an infrastructure so that people on the flight line, people who are trying to do their jobs, could be mobile enabled in doing their jobs. Certainly getting after that, it's a hard task. Right now, if a service provider wants to put a cell tower on a base, the process takes more than 2 years. But I'm happy to say that we are, through championship from DoD-CIO, they are working on how do we make it easier, how do we make the process better, do the frequency deconfliction, do everything that we need to do, make it faster, and get that through so that the service providers can actually provide service on or near our bases. That's quite a journey, but it's one of the really important steps in enabling what we need to do. If I walk around again in the Pentagon, I'm going to there's so many places where there won't be a Wi-Fi hotspot. If there is, my phone won't communicate with it. There's just so many gaps in coverage that it means that I'm walking around with a device that's really good at home, but not going to serve me really very well when I'm anywhere, in any office building that's not home. So what do we do about that? One of the things is we've been working with industry to try to find out, okay, we have these infrastructure gaps, shortcomings. There are places where different entities are managing different parts of infrastructure, but not managing it together as one complete system. We've gone out with an RFI that closed a while ago about industry. We'd like to talk to you about having a single service manager for our mobility infrastructure, and more than the infrastructure. So the single service manager, we'd be talking about the ordering, the telephony management, provisioning, sustainment, access to mobile device management, access to a mobile app store, security tools, continuous monitoring, reporting, usage monitoring, and really one of the really important parts would be technology insertion. So something new, something good out in the marketplace. We have trouble getting those things into the federal government, but working through a single security manager and industry partner, we're hoping we could do a better job of getting new technologies in. Really excited to see the response we got. We had about 16 respondents to that RFI, and range of industries showed us there's capability, there's competition, so we're going to be going forward with an RFP later on this year. So we're very excited about that. But that is one of the ways in which we want to address and comprehensively be able to bring forward an enterprise capability all the way through, all the way through the whole process. Without that, we're going to have to, we still have to deal with areas with, as you're walking around with whatever sort of mobile device, how do you get to a gateway? How do you get to a VPN? How do you do all these things? How do you bring all these elements together? So there's a long way to go there, but it's definitely worth doing. Now, one of the last areas I've kind of alluded to has to do with policy and standards. So again, I can walk this machine through the Pentagon, right through the hallways. When I get to an office, then good chance that I would not be allowed to take my mobile device into that office or into that, that facility, because we have policies, and everybody has their own policy and different policies about what is allowed and what is not allowed. This is a DISA-provided device, and you can see from the sticker here that I'm allowed to carry it into the DISA facility. I've got a second sticker here for a second facility that I'm allowed to carry it in. But you can imagine this could be like a traveling salesman's suitcase where you got, the stickers from all over the place to get it into some limited subset of areas. That's not the way to go. We need to have standard policies across the DoD, perhaps across the federal government, with reciprocity, with an understanding of, yes, this is this sort of device, here's how it's managed. I trust that. I'm going to let this device into my facility. Now, I don't want to imply that policy or standards or people saying no is necessarily bad. I mean, there's policy for a reason. And I was kind of amused as we're going forward with some of our classified device offerings. We've been working with the people who set policy for classified use, and we have a great secret level classified device. But it seems that people who set the policy for how you use classified, they're not too keen on the idea. As we get to more and more higher classification levels, they don't like the thought of someone standing in line at Starbucks, okay, and just blah, 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 blah. We'll have a latte, no foam, soy, whatever, blah, 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 classified, classified, classified. And oh no, it's okay. It's a secure device. So there's certainly more to the situation than just technology. It is part of, again, how we do business as the Department of Defense. So there are a lot of things to work out here. Now, the whole time I've been talking to you, it's been in the context of a flat rectangular device. And if you stick with that context, then you can join me in being the next generation of dinosaur that the rest of the younger people will look back and say, what were they thinking? Because mobility goes far, far beyond this sort of rectangular device, or even bigger rectangular devices. Mobility extends to, say, the helmet in for an F-35 pilot. They're getting all sorts of electronic inputs. It's being processed, presented to them, and they are acting on that, and they are mobile-enabled through that device. Google Glass is mobility. An F-16, that's a mobility device. And just like a flat rectangular mobility device, all of those mobility devices that I've mentioned, they have some common characteristics. They absolutely depend on information and information processing in order to function. They spend a lot of their life disconnected from, let's say, the mothership, disconnected from the rest of the world. They need to have security. They need to have monitoring. They need to be able to respond to a security incident. It's possible data loss protection, endpoint protection. It's very applicable even on these weird, non-flat rectangular devices. So as we think about mobility, as we think about mobile enabling a workforce, we need to think far beyond these. Now, I've enumerated some of the aspects that have to come together to make these things truly useful to enable our workforce. That's really important foundational steps, but it can't stop there. And at the same time that we're dealing with these, we need to be dealing with the rest of the mobile world around us. So we are very much hoping that industry and our partners in academia and research labs, that they are coming forward with ways to deal with not only our current mobile devices, but a mobile future, where people are enabled, where they are able to do their jobs better than ever before, and do more because of the information and information systems that they have helping them. So I want to pause there. We have a little bit of time for questions. And I think that there was an email address provided, I believe, for questions. So we have somebody gathering questions right now. Go ahead, Kim.
All right, ma'am.
Only the easy ones.
So first question for you. The DoD PKI credentials meeting with the government and industry that was held last year was very informative. Will there be more updates as purebred matures? Ensuring the EMMs can incorporate the purebred solution into their ecosystems is imperative to enabling a mobile workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll ask Kim to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that certainly through projects such as the NIAP, the National Information Assurance Partnership, through Commercial Solutions for Classified. We want to work in partnership with the right information flow to definitely make it possible for industry to support what we need to do as we grow in these solutions. So I anticipate that purebred will be discussed quite a bit. The only little caveat I had, of course, when we're talking about classified solutions, we're looking for one of the, the NSA-approved trusted integrators to help bridge the solutions between industry and the government. So yes, do anticipate that purebred will be out there, and the aspects of it that we, especially emphasizing the aspects of it that we need to keep on growing into the future.
Can you talk a little bit about the application RFI that was released in December?
A little bit. So it closed in January. We're still, gosh, it's still January, right? Okay. We're still looking at the information that we got. What we were asking for was we wanted to talk about application security. So, I mentioned application vetting, reputation services, but basically, how do we go about making sure that as we're getting apps and enabling more and more apps on for our people and our systems, that we have the right security posture, the monitoring, the cyber tools. So that was the RFI. Now, Kim, do you know how many responses we got?
We have not actually gotten that back from the contracting officer yet. It just closed.
Okay, it just closed. So I really can't say what the results were. I hope we got some good results.
And ma'am, that's actually it for the questions. I think the weather has...
I have stunned you. All right. Okay, well, thank you very much. And looking at the agenda you all have today, the things that you're going to be talking about, I just want to say, kudos for coming in and for, being involved with this. This is really important. This is important to how we continue to protect the nation and, and achieve our national goals. So thank you for being part of this. This is one of the really exciting areas, so I hope you'll enjoy your day. Thanks.
Morning. Thank you, General Zabel. I'm Dave Nagel from Aperion. The next session will be a panel on disruptive technologies. This panel will provide a sneak peek into capabilities you can expect to see in the near and distant future. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelist and moderator. First, our moderator is Bill Edwards, SPA-WAR, U.S. Navy. Second, Josh Dixon, Senior Solutions Architect from Samsung. Henry Jones, Founder, Managing Partner, Copus Mobile. Ken Bible, Deputy Chief Information Officer, United States Marine Corps. Terry Simpson, President, Chief Technology Officer, Highside Technology. And finally, Beam Telepresence by Suitable Technologies. Rock and roll.
How we're arranging things.
I guess we need, that's fine. Grab this one. We need one more, yeah. Awesome.
What's that? Do we need any water? No. Howdy, folks. Jeez. I get slightly intimidated by all these people. That's why I've got my crew with me. Well, let's see, I recognize a few faces. Rob Anderson, my buddy Joe Golden, and my whooper buddy from DISA. What's your name again? So, yeah. So we're here to discuss, and I'm the moderator, by the way, and I take that job tongue in cheek. So anything goes, especially with these panelists. They're very talented individuals. I know all of them, well, 3 of them well, and then the gentleman down the end, Dallas, we just met this morning. So you're going to be hearing from Beam Technologies in Dallas as and the thing of it is, disruptive in one sense, Dallas knows to speak up. So you'll find out his technology's pretty cool. So we're going to go and have these panelists introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Dr. Henry Jones with Copus Mobile. I've known Henry a long time and have worked with him, and then we'll have Ken, and then Josh, and then Terry, and last we'll have Dallas from Beam Technology. So Henry, you're on deck, and take it from there.
Said there'd be a clicker up here. I think this is something to that. Okay, great. So it's an honor to be up here on this panel. I see here that, I'll probably never be as good looking or as smart as Bill, but maybe in a couple of 100 years I'll be as old. I'm going to give 3 examples over the next couple of minutes about disruptive technologies. And the first one is disruption in terms of when the suppliers just overshoot what the market is demanding. This is a diagram of how most handheld radio systems are set up. There is either a direct connection or they go through some repeater. If you want to upgrade the system, typically that means you upgrade everything. And for even a small size unit, that can be a 7-figure investment. Well, what if instead we augment those radios by connecting them to smartphones and tablets? Not to do things in exactly the same way. It's not like you are moving your cellular system to a different type of network, but you're really changing the applications that you expect to get done on the network. And so what we've done is we've built an app that allows us to use an ICOM network. There's no additional investment in the network. You just spend a few $1,000s, and I mean literally just a few $1,000s instead of 7 figures, to change that network completely, give it Blue Force tracking, send messages and so forth over the serial, the background serial connection that they make possible. That's disruption type number 1. Disruption type number 2 is when we can approach a problem in an entirely different way. So if you wanted to give a EOD tech a lesson in how to appropriately use a new ground penetrating radar to do route clearance, you're going to need 3 things. You're going to need that EOD tech, you're going to need his trainer, you're going to need that device, and then all that's going to have to be in some facility, and they're going to have to be together long enough for him to get the idea, this is the sweep rate, and this is what the sweep path is supposed to look like. Well, what if instead you create an app? And that app, like a lot of the golf swing analyzers, it provides feedback to that trainee, and he doesn't have to be with the trainer, he doesn't have to be with the device, he can be in the middle of the Mediterranean on the ship, and he can take his smart device, and he gets immediate feedback. Do I have the right pace? Do I have the right sweep path? And he can spend 30 hours getting up to speed and getting that physical muscle memory intact, so that when he is with the trainer, they're not worried about these things that are really mechanical. They can worry about the things that are mental. The third type of disruption we've been a part of is when, and this is sort of the classic Clayton Christensen way to think about it, when you start something small and try to make it good. So we talked to the jump masters at Fort Benning and the jump school and asked them what's their biggest complaint. They're absolutely, for the last 75 years, being driven crazy by putting together jump manifests. And I asked them, so why don't you just have some software that helps you do it? The answer was, every time they started trying to put something together, it became this big, humongous thing. Let's track parachutes, and let's track pay hertz, and all this kind of thing. And actually, all they wanted to do was just get their manifest done in a faster way. So we have a tablet with a built-in CAC reader. They put together the basics for the jump. The guys that are, as they're loading the plane, they swipe it, and it organizes them by the chalk, and it spits out the form really quickly, and they absolutely love it. When they buy a system, it's like they're buying a person because of all the hours that it frees up. So that's the details of what we're doing. But to get to that point, we had to do a lot of research and try to understand what sort of world we were living in. So what we found out, and this is something the GAO, it's a piece of information from them, only 5.7% of technology that gets developed for the government actually gets in users' hands. I mean, that's terrible. That's 4 out of 70. And there's a lot of room for disruption. McKinsey, this is a report they put together. Look where we are as the U.S. We are absolutely atrocious in terms of productivity as a military. There are 100 admins for every 19 combat troops. Look how we compare to the rest of the world. There's a lot of stuff that we can do with disruptive technology. And we're not even really focused, if you think about it, on what's important. There's a couple of stats up here. Basically, the impact to civilians and to the warfighters is 2,000% higher death rate now than there was 300 years ago. We're moving in the wrong direction in terms of disruption. Are we focused on the right things to try to disrupt? So what we've done, as I said, we put together a lot of research. It was for our own good, and it's something that we can share. We'd love to share it with you. We found some different things that we've pulled together that have shown that we can have some idea of where it is that we can focus our energy to be disruptive. And we call it, as an executive briefing, basically, we built for ourselves. At this point, we'd like to share it with you. And so I want to take this opportunity to let the folks in the room here know about it. It was built on, as you can see some of the stats here, a lot of different research that we put together. We wrap all this up into a very short period of time. And we cover some of the big picture things, but also some things like our external threats that are small, our external threats that are large, our internal threats, which is in our inability to really respond to the external threats. We talk about some of the innovations that if we don't use for the good guys, they're already getting used for the bad guys. So what is it that we can do to make a difference in that respect? And then what it is that you can make a decision, or what decisions you can make to support your units in this new era. So if you are interested in hearing more about this beyond what we're able to talk about on this panel, here are a couple of things you can do. Just send an email to that address or text message to that, and then we'll be able to come and give you a lot more information than what I've just been able to go over in the last few minutes. Thanks.
Great. Ken?
Yeah, so if I can, I'll just stay here
Sure, sure.
and talk to the group. So thanks, first of all, for all of you for making the trip down. I figured out this morning on the car down that it was a crapshoot as to which route you took as to how long it was going to take you. So I appreciate the effort that you made. So I'm glad that you brought up the Clayton Christensen reference because I've been trying to noodle through disruptive technology and what that really means, right? How many of you believe that the automobile was disruptive? So Christensen would actually disagree with you and say it wasn't the automobile that was disruptive, it was the mass production, the ability to mass produce automobiles. Because automobiles existed in parallel with horse and buggy, but they were only for the rich. So the piece that made the disruption was when mass production made it cheap enough for the average person, and the adoption became so proliferate. So when we talk about disruptive innovation, I think we have to frame it in a couple different contexts. And Christensen does this, framing it in terms of sustaining evolution, which is where I'm not changing a market for any technology, but rather I'm evolving that technology over time. So to some degree, I see some of the things happening with our radio networks and integrating IP into our radio networks is fitting into that realm. Then there's the evolutionary disruption, which is changing the market, but it's expanding the services that are offered within a market. And then you've got true disruptions, like the mass production of the automobile that completely changed the landscape. And I think the mobile devices fit in that category. The idea that now, how many of you have a landline telephone anymore? I know I don't, but how many people have a landline telephone? Very few. Because the mobile devices have so proliferated in the marketplace. So what's the next disruption that's going to completely change the way in which change a market? And that's going to be the big question in my mind. But from a Department of Defense perspective, I think our challenges are to try to figure out those evolutionary and sustaining disruptions. You know, what you talked about in terms of how do we reduce the number of people it takes to go operate a system or to train a system? What are the ways in which we can extend the existing capabilities or new ways of doing that capability? We haven't changed the market, but I'm changing the way in which I do that function. So that was my thoughts coming into the discussion today, and I didn't really introduce myself, but I'm Kenneth Bible. I'm the Deputy Director of C4 and the Deputy CIO for the Marine Corps. And this idea of disruptive technology is really critical for us to figure out. If you want to know how critical it is to the Marine Corps, I'd point you towards reading the update, what we'd call a fragmentary order, FRAGO, to the Commandant's planning guidance that just came out last night or night before last. And it's an update to General Dunford's Commandant's planning guidance from last year, but General Neller, the current Commandant, has updated that guidance. And one of the major themes in here is about how do we innovate? How do we take on board new technologies, but also new ways of doing business? So that's out there. You can read it. You know, take on board what he's guided and directed the Marine Corps to go towards, and that'll help frame your discussions with me when we have the opportunity to talk.
Thanks, Ken.
Sure.
Ken's got his hands full as Deputy CIO for the Marine Corps, especially with the drive credential solution and developing not only unclassed but classified solutions for the warfighter. Our buddy Rob Anderson, who tapped out, he's working for some little scrawny small company, 3 initials, I can't remember. He's sitting in the audience, and we helped through his leadership, along with Josh and with Ken, a over-the-air drive credential solution ahead of DISA, by the way. Who ever heard of those guys anyway? So anyway, we're grateful for the opportunity to support Ken and his efforts, because he's got some tough calls to make, especially with this disruptive scenario. So without further ado, and Josh, be warned, don't talk a leg off a cast iron stove. Let's keep it brief, because he's now a sales guy for Samsung, and I've warned these guys about being a sales guy. So you're up.
So my name is Josh Dixon. I am a former Marine, so I like to keep it simple as well. So no slides for me. Sorry about that. I'd like to continue the discussion around the same lines. Disruptive technology, I see it as a change in our economics. New S-curves are created, a new way of doing things, and a more efficient way in some cases. So the way I see it is today we have communication devices to communicate, to talk to people, to share information. We have more and more sensors being connected, and now as Internet of Things is continuing to grow, and more devices and products and solutions are evolving and emerging in the market space, I believe that's going to take us into this next step, is when the sensors start overloading the network, and we need data analytics to start consuming that sensor information, and if we don't have that, it just goes to waste. So in the DoD, I see that as you start to get data analytics down to the lowest echelon and be able to consume their sensors that they're being able to feed back into the network, that's when you're going to start to see the biggest innovations occur. I do believe that as we see our warfighters, we have sensors on their personnel today. So imagine if we had a platoon out there in the forward deployed with a number of sensors on, so they didn't have to communicate at all through voice back to their CP to be able to understand what was going on. They could tell all their health information. They could tell where their location is. They could see them from above. They could see them when they go inside of buildings. They wouldn't have to even say one word over the radio. I think that is going to be a big step forward when we can do that and have the infrastructure to be able to do that at any location around the world. I think that as we start to get mobile devices on our wristwatch, from a Samsung perspective, I do see our mobile devices in about 1.5 to 2 years being equivalent to the watches, the smart watches that we have today. Today, there's some limitations on processing power, energy power consumption that limit some of this, but I think over the next year or two, we'll start to see some innovations emerge that'll help us get to an equivalent device on a wristwatch. So now we're talking of cutting the price of mobile devices in half and putting them on every individual at half the price on a watch that can be independent. I also see virtual reality as a big change as well. Today, and for the last 50 years, there's been a conference the DoD hosts called ITSEC. And for those 50 years, it's changed its name over time. But essentially, modeling and simulation has gone from the very large infrastructure buildings, areas like this that has to be able to sustain this type of modeling and simulation environments, down to a head-mounted display now. So if you went last year to this event, you saw a number of head-mounted displays being presented in this conference, shown, displayed. A number of them had tethers because of processing power, because of battery. In modeling simulations, you have lots of data that you have to process. So as that becomes disconnected now, and now we have the ability to disconnect that virtual reality and bring it down to the lowest echelon, we can have Marines and soldiers being able to see that UAV video real time, being able to virtually control the UAVs, the EOD techs being able to control their robots from a virtual reality so that they could have 600 miles away, put on a head-mounted display, and completely see the environment where that robot is. And now he is that robot and acts and does that mission, is that EOD tech on station to be able to provide those services that he needs to. So I see that as the battery continues to progress and our processing power continues to double, memory continues to double. I start to see these virtual realities starting to emerge. How we train and educate. Imagine if you had an avatar instead of an instructor training you, and you could ask that avatar questions in your immersive environment. And then you could go through and answer the questions, and then you pass that lesson, and then you move on to the next lesson. And you could do this anywhere you are, anywhere in the world. So you would no longer have to sit in front of an instructor in an auditorium with a lot of students filling out paperwork. They could do it virtually now through these head-mounted displays and be able to communicate. The challenge I see is how do you do that when you have classified networks? How do you do that when you have content that needs to be developed? Today, content for these head-mounted displays are built for consumers, for gaming. How do you get them interested in this industry? That's the challenge I see, that we're having some headway and we're making some progress where now we're starting to get some of these content providers moved into this industry, interested in this industry. How do we get those systems that we need to put in these head-mounted displays connected to our networks? Well, if you use your mobile device today that's already approved and you plug it into a goggles for head-mounted display, it's already connected to the SIPRNet. It's already connected to your JWICs. And then that content can be pushed directly to your device. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think that's how we're going to start to see these big innovations. And the ROI return to the government because they've already built this infrastructure around mobility. Now just extend it one step further, add some goggles for pennies compared to what it would be to take a very large infrastructure to every location that you would need this type of information and content deployed to.
Very good. Terry.
Good morning, all. I'm not sure if I've got a slide up there. I did not originally plan to do a slide, but I heard there was a contest for the ugliest slide of the day. So I sent one in. I'm not sure if it'll get shown or not. Not too important. I'm Terry Simpson, president and CTO of a small business that Highside Technology that does a lot of technology strategy and acquisition strategy support, technology transition planning, working with DoD and the intelligence community. I spent most of my career up until a couple years ago in the government, was previously at Headquarters Marine Corps Intelligence Department as the CTO and CIO, and then before that was in the acquisition community for the Navy, leading the acquisition of the Navy's intelligence portfolio. So I'm a recovering acquisition guy, and I'm here to admit it. But we're talking about technology, and often technology and acquisition don't really, especially in terms of talking disruption, how do you actually acquire disruptive technologies and how do you operationalize? And we've heard a lot of great comments about aspects from training to the impacts of technologies, disruptive technologies on the full doctrine, manpower, the full end-to-end gamut of operating force considerations. And so being able to identify and plan and actually field and operationalize disruptive technologies is a big challenge for DoD and the intelligence community and the government in general. So a lot of what we're doing, working with our partners in the government, is taking a look at technology opportunities, working with the science and technology community, and looking at ways in which to incrementally integrate key technologies into places where you can prove them out. A couple of things, and I don't guess the slide got up there, but a couple of, in terms of the mobility arena, a couple of big considerations that we're looking at and working with technologies in is techniques for increasing throughput in communications to enable more information flow, more secure information flow, and as well as other areas of security, hardware-based types of encryption technologies that are allowing very high speeds of encryption. Some of these technologies are, we believe, will have a big impact in helping to take the power of cloud computing further and further into the tactical arena. It's kind of, there are many aspects of cloud technologies, either looking at ways to go to market or provisioning services or provisioning infrastructure, but taking some of those technologies that are widely available in the commercial space, how do you actually operationalize them in a tactical environment and do so in a robust, secure kind of a way. So a couple of key technologies that are helping along those lines. One is a partner company that has a high-speed encryption appliance that has been in development in partnership with the intelligence community and also has gone through some pretty extensive initial testing with the Army, is achieving really wire speed encryption, 100 gigabits per second encryption of data at the IP level. And so that's pretty interesting to see how can you apply that kind of a technology and scale it to enable mobility at the tactical edge and to enable the kind of data security and data interoperability at the tactical edge that DoD and the intelligence community is striving for. So there's a lot of promise there. We expect to continue to do some testing with with Army and others over the next year or so, and expect that technology to portend a great level of new potential for multi-levels of independent security, as well as very high-speed data encryption into and out of the cloud. Current metrics in the intel community with cloud data is showing latencies of up to an hour of getting data into or out of the cloud. And so when you're operating at the tactical edge and trying to interoperate with large storage of data, those kinds of latencies just for encryption and security just are not, not tenable. So we think this technology has a great opportunity to change those numbers and create some disruption that's going to help improve the ability to encrypt and protect our data. Second area is in terms of throughput, and it kind of gets down to physics and modulation and RF and all that. We have been working with a technology called transpositional modulation, and in the developments of that technology, it's almost a parasitic type of a modulation where it adds encoding onto the harmonics of whatever baseband signal, baseband modulation you're using, be it QAM or GSM or any other kind of existing modulation. It's adding an additional set of encoding onto the harmonics of those, the baseband signal, and in doing so, we're showing that you can gain spectral efficiencies on a baseband transmission of anywhere from 2 times to 32 times, depending on the basic modulation techniques being used. And the real interesting thing about that is not only that it's increasing throughput, but it does so in a way that's low probability of detect, and it doesn't require a whole new evolution of infrastructure to support it. It can basically capitalize on whatever existing communications infrastructure you have. So it's a really interesting technology from that standpoint. A lot of testing and prototyping has been done in the with analog radios, in applications for backhaul of mobile communications, but with the same types of techniques and proliferation of software-defined radios, we think that the same kinds of modulation approach could be applied to really any kind of a network, point-to-point MIMO type of network. So we're looking forward in the next year or so to do some testing and prototyping with the Marine Corps and with the intelligence community to kind of wring out some of those numbers and prove that technology out a little bit more. Those are a couple of the more interesting technologies, especially in terms of how what we see as potentially having an operational impact on what tactical capabilities will look like in the future.
Thanks, Jerry. Now we got our friendly robot from Beam, who we can see. Dallas, you're up.
Hello, I'm Dallas Gerker. I come to you from my home in Seymour, Indiana, southern Indiana. I'm an electrical engineer. I work for Suitable Technologies. We're located out in Palo Alto, California. And I am using today, this is our Beam product. It's a device. I am at home using a Windows computer. Talking to you. I have a standard ISP connection. Using my mouse to interact and drive. I have cameras up above to look out and one down below to see where I'm at. When talking about disruptive technologies in the automobile, I always love the story about Henry Ford when doing his market research and asking people about what they wanted. Their response was they didn't want a motorized carriage, they wanted a faster horse. And so it's interesting how people don't necessarily always know what they want, and they definitely have their direction in mind, and new technologies come along and completely change things around. The Beam was a product that was created and born out of necessity. I was a remote employee living in Indiana, working in California. As an electrical engineer, I was designing the control systems, motor controls, communication systems for our robots out in California. And in an effort to improve my communications with everybody, a colleague of mine, Kurt Myers, and I developed what we call the TechSci. It was nothing more than a computer with camera monitor speakers mounted on a mobile base, and I could sit in my office here in Indiana with the joystick, and I could drive it around and interact with everybody. It turned out that worked so well, it changed my interactions with everybody and allowed me to be very, very effective at work. And became so there was so much interest from visitors and people that saw this that we decided to build a set of prototypes to see how others used it. We knew how I used it and how it changed my career and interaction with everybody, and how would others use it. So we built a set of 25 prototypes. We sent them out into the world. One of them actually ended up on the Big Bang Theory CBS TV show known as the Shellbot. Became very popular. So usually when people see this, they say, "Oh, they stole that from the Shellbot." This product here. So we then, with the giant success of that alpha program, decided to split off from Willow Garage, and we created a new startup company called Suitable Technologies to develop and bring this to market. Its primary use is in the consumer and commercial industry. It's used for remote employees, and it's used for large companies that have multiple offices around the world. The big difference that this technology brings, for me as a remote employee, I find myself having to ask people to do things for me. And there's nothing worse than when you want to ask somebody to do something for you and you have to then ask them if they could go to the conference room so you could have a video conference with them or something like that. This technology allows me to go right to their office and talk and interact to them, which is what you would want to do if you were there locally. It allows me to go down to the lab, work with people in the lab. I can go to the production line and deal with production issues and things like that right there. Just pull up right along the technicians and the manufacturing and see what the issues are and deal and address with that and address those issues. So it really makes a big difference compared to some other video conferencing solution that's dedicated into a conference room where we kind of have to schedule meetings, have to gather everybody around and do that sort of interaction. I actually find that a lot of my interaction happens in the hallways and in the lab and in that sort of casual environment. And this technology addresses that and enables that significantly.
Thank you. So now we roughly have half an hour for this group to answer some questions. And I have a list of questions that we put together, and I've got a couple of questions that are in the inbox, and we'll settle on those about the last 10 minutes. So I'm going to ask Henry, do you have any statistics regarding the adoption of disruptive technologies and their impact?
Yeah, one of the ones that I was able to show in those slides, that 5.7% of the technologies that are developed are put to use, and I think that that's an indication of the non-disruptive way to build a technology. You just want to you put something together and then see if it works, and that's not as efficient as trying to just solve some quick little problem and get it out there and put it to use. Fortunately,
okay, now Ken is Deputy CIO for the Marine Corps. That is an executive position. He has to, his job is to make sure for the Marine Corps, the warfighter, the enabler, that this disruptive technology can work. There's a business case for it. So Ken, based on what you've intimated this morning, as well as some of the statistics that Henry has shown from your position as Deputy CIO, and then you've seen what Beam can do, we'd like to get you one of those to So if I'm in the
Hey,
ditch.
Rob was winking at me.
Oh, yeah,
He
Rob.
I don't know whether he's saying I would be wandering the hallways or
Yeah,
he'd
yeah.
be wandering into my office. But one way or the
And
other.
Rob just tapped out of C4, and with Ken's job, it's a tough job. He's got a lot of decisions to make as a researcher, supporting him along with industry support from Josh. Josh is a Marine. There's no former Marines, right? And they take that with them wherever they go. It's kind of like God created men equally, and then some became Marines. Now,
Sure.
I'm a Navy guy, and my family's all Marines, and they'll tell you I'm a disappointment to them. So that being said, our job, since Ken is representing the Marine Corps, we have to support him. And as a researcher, he may call on me or Ton or Crystal, those that he's familiar with that have worked Marine Corps subjects that we did for him and Rob with Drive Credentials with a corporately owned type functionality. He has to call on us to solve these problems sooner than later. So with that being said, Ken, as a decision maker, you're a decision maker. We give you use cases, you get to make decisions. Is this disruptive technology, which has been presented by Beam, any of this type of thing, what fiscal landscape can your organization influence the Marine Corps with these types of disruptive technologies?
Yeah, let me see if I can kind of frame the question a little bit. So, you know, how the budget landscape is pretty tough right now. You know, we're coming out of an environment where if we said we needed something to support the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, the funds would be there to go do it. We're coming out of that era of conflict into an era where we still have to maintain our readiness. You know, Marine Corps is still the nation's force in readiness, the crisis response force. So a great pressure to try to maintain the readiness across the force, not tiered readiness where some units are ready and some are not, but the ability to surge out and take care of the problem when the nation calls. We're most ready when the nation is least ready. So there's a tremendous interest in this declining budget environment where the United States is shifted its focus into the domestic issues, and the discretionary budget of the United States is not focused upon building new defense programs. And the defense programs that we were building, new ships, the Joint Strike Fighter, even the Marine Corps' amphibious combat vehicle, the costs of those things have gotten so high that it's very constraining in terms of where we can take on board innovation. That said, as was pointed out by Henry in his presentation, there's opportunities to use technology like virtual and constructive simulation or environments to support training. Very intrigued with the way in which we can use new types of modulation. Terry mentioned the transpositional modulation, which the calculus of which is still boggling me right now. But the idea of something as potentially as transformational as the shift from AM radio to FM radio. You think about that when you were, I don't know what the age of the audience is, but those who grew up and matured in the 70s, we remember listening to the AM radio for whether school was going to be closed tomorrow, right? Now AM radio is relegated to the dustbin. What's the transformational modulation that's going to allow us to, if we can leverage the communications gear that we have today, but with a new modulation that will allow us to get more throughput or greater range from those very same radios that we have today. I think those are potentially very intriguing, disruptive technologies that we have to look at. Also the discussion about the encryption capabilities. You know, we have a fairly significant bill ahead of us related to encryption technologies, right? Because computing is getting greater and greater, and so the methods of encryption that we have relied upon have to evolve over time. That's now forcing how do we take that on board as a hardware shift, hardware that can actually accommodate the algorithms. Massively expensive things. So those are the kinds, as a CIO, and trying to go make the best investment decisions possible, looking at how can we leverage those kinds of things that allow us to get more mileage out of what we own rather than wholesale replacements, because there are certain fundamental gear and programs that we have to buy. We have to get to a next generation fighter jet. We've got to build the F-35. We're in it. It is going to be transformational for the forces. We've got to build a new amphibious combat vehicle because we're dealing with 1960s technology for putting our Marines ashore. We've got to do these things. So we've got to figure out how do we get, how do we use this incredible ability of information technology and mobile technologies and computing power that's coming about as a virtue of the industrial cycle of improving computing according to Moore's law. How do we take advantage of that that's happening naturally in industry? How can we leverage that to get advantage for our Marines? Because there's not a whole lot of commercial market for a joint strike fighter or for an amphibious combat vehicle. But we can leverage those commercial advances in the information technology space to get advantage. Going back to the budget environment, the other piece that's challenging is that the most fungible form of funding is that operational money, the O&M dollars year to year. The procurement dollars, the investment dollars, have gotten to be the hardest thing to go predict because of the Budget Control Act, because of sequestration. So the ability to go get the money programmed in for multi-year procurements has gotten harder and harder. Well, that's also where the research and development dollars are on those major programs. So this whole environment has made it very difficult for us to take on board innovation.
Thank you.
I don't know whether that's answering the question, but it kind of paints the picture of the environment.
That's spot on. Josh, as a Marine, now you're working with Samsung. How difficult has it been, or maybe it hasn't been difficult, to introduce disruptive technologies to the DoD?
So difficulty is a matter of how much communication is allowed. So I think it's a matter of finding out what the real root problem is. When you talk with various people across the industry, across the DoD, you'll find various problems, but you have to really find out what is the root problem that we're trying to solve. There's commercial technology out there that's built around consumers, and those consumers have a very well-defined path of what their requirements are. In the DoD, it's a little different, right? The requirements come from operators, they come from maintainers, they come from IT admins, and their requirements can be very different from consumers. In a lot of cases, they're very similar, but there's additional set of requirements that they can add to that. Now, when we have large companies building these requirements and manufacturing processes in place and cycles that are built around, for Samsung, 6-month cycles, 3 months of development, 3 months of testing, and the new product comes out. So when we build our strategy, our way forward, we look at consumers. Very easy to model, very easy to understand requirements. When we look at regulated industries, a lot more difficult from a communication standpoint to understand what is the true requirement. So what we need, in my opinion, is communication. We need to be able to communicate with you and understand what the problems are, and then prototype, pilot different ideas, different thoughts, different solutions, so that we can identify to make changes left or right. What I do as a solution architect, I don't take what you tell me and go back to our headquarter element and say, okay, you need to make these tweaks in this product, it'd be very difficult to change that 5 million device line that just was pushed out, to change that with one little minor tweak. It's very difficult to do that. But what I can do is collect those requirements, and over time, I aggregate them, build the opportunity, and then we communicate with them on a regular basis and saying, here's the demand we see in 9 verticals. And then we correlate, or we bring it down to the root problem that we're trying to solve and say, this is really the problem that the consumers have too. And they're going to need to be able to solve this problem too when they get there. That's the challenge that we have of how do we do that? How do we communicate the problem and then communicate it from a business standpoint to large companies? Because one single company cannot accomplish these large innovations that have to occur. It takes an ecosystem, right? Especially in mobility. Mobility is an ecosystem that requires a lot of moving pieces and a lot of collaboration to make things occur. So I believe communication is really how we can do it, and overcoming those difficulties of communicating is the biggest problem.
Thank you, Terry. Since you're an acquisitions guy, and how do you best formulate a disruptive technology in order to partner with Ken at the Marine Corps? What's the process that you must formulate in order to sell the capability, the use cases that fundamentally help solve Ken's issues?
So I think, as Josh and as Mr. Bible indicated, a deep-rooted understanding of what the priorities, what the operational needs are, what the real root challenges are in certain situations that really throw up roadblocks or speed bumps for getting technology integrated in. I think also that there's so much science and technology research going on within the government. I mean, notwithstanding the budget pressures, the pressurized budget environment that we've been in now the last handful of years, but especially during the 2000s, there was a lot of innovation and a lot of real rapid prototyping and focus on getting solutions out into the save lives on the battlefield. And so I think we learned a lot of lessons around how to do some of that. I think today some of the budgetary and acquisition process challenges are still there, but there are opportunities still to pilot and prototype and to work with the S&T community in DoD and to work with the technology community to show and apply promising technologies to specific problems. And, we've found there's still a lot of very forward-thinking, innovative-minded leaders in DoD, like Mr. Bible and others, that certainly recognize the big picture and can see ways in which technologies can be evaluated, assessed, and potentially piloted and proven out. It's certainly not easy, and there's no, I would say there's no big refined process for doing that right now. The DoD acquisition process is what it is. Sure. And so it is a challenge to innovate within that, but
okay.
There's avenues for progress.
Now for our good friends at Beam. Dallas, how does your organization solicit feedback from the warfighter in order to represent your technology in a way that can give us insight on how we can fundamentally better use your technology to solve our issues.
Well, one of the great things about this technology, I think, is everybody wants to give us feedback on how they want to use it and what they can do. So you have the people that love to travel, or that actually hate to travel, that have to travel quite a lot type of thing and attend meetings everywhere. And how they want to be able to use this to simply have FedEx, send the devices out and attend their meetings here and there across the country and across the globe. We have, of course, all kinds of feedback mechanisms built into our software, and we do a lot of various pilot programs where we can send these out to companies and they can try them out and see how they work in their environment. I think this is a technology, it's really hard to tell somebody about how this works. They have to experience it and have to actually interact with somebody and start to feel that they can actually feel like that remote person is there with them and have that presence. And that's a really hard thing to just kind of tell somebody about. They have to experience it. So we do a lot of programs where we loan these out and let companies try them first.
Okay. So we've got some questions that are filtering in. A couple of them come from our esteemed colleague sitting in the front row, Rob Anderson, and his hot topic has always been DoD PKI credentials. And fundamentally, Major General spoke about the purebred solution. Greg's here, Ms. Kim's here from DISA PM Mobility, and we want to applaud DISA for their efforts in providing the warfighter and the enabler with a mobile device, a commercial mobile device that has been stamped NIAP approved, an iOS device to where the provisioning mechanism has been attested, and SoftX 509 credentials. And part of our job, myself, Ton, Crystal, the rest of us that have worked this stuff for at least 7 years, is to make that a better GFE device, iOS, than Samsung, Knox, Google platform, as well as BlackBerry, Windows, and so forth, coming down the pipe on derived credentials. Our group is working with mainly a hardware-rooted trust, global platform alliance functionality, along with Samsung, to develop a similar approach for that program and other programs for the Marine Corps, especially in the Navy. So Rob's issue with DoD PKI credentials meeting the government industry was very informative. Will there be more updates as purebred matures? Ensuring the EMMs can incorporate the purebred solution into their ecosystem is imperative to enabling a mobile workforce. We've got, now is Ms. Kim here? Okay, Greg?
Bill, in general, I answered that. I sent another one pertaining to your PKI team. So the question I sent in was, PKI team that you created.
Fundamentally, we have worked issues for a couple of years, well, even more than that, call it 4 years for the Marine Corps. When Captain Dixon had the trusted handheld solution, which was a tactical CSFC solution, as well as the personally owned, corporately enabled, very similar to purebred, with provisioning and those use cases and so forth. Our group has, and we're working with NSA, we have a forthcoming CRADA that we've developed to look at embedded secure element, hardware-rooted trust zone capability. That being said, part of this adventure with derived credentials, there's a business case attached to this. GFE, can it survive from a business case perspective? That's up to Ken, okay? And his counterparts, Mr. Hickey. You ever notice these SESs, when they get promoted, they go from first name basis to Mr. or that type of thing? Not around me, they don't, because I worked for him in the ditch. So this is Ken, by the way, to his friends. You guys, it's Mr. Bible. I'm his rear security, and all he does is tug on his right earlobe, and we push him out of the way for him. Ken, like I told you, he has he's in a tough spot. He has to make sure from a tactical perspective, and his C4 policy. Ken owns policy. He has to adhere to what DISA is doing, what the other MILDEPs are doing, DOD CIO. We have been in that fight for a long time. We've got to protect his blind side. We've got to protect the forward piece with disruptive technology. That's what our group does from a Navy perspective. We're forward thinkers with use cases. So with that in mind, Rob, I'm gonna ask Ken his opinion on commercial mobile devices, and I know he's been working a solution as well, and he can maybe discuss that for about 5 minutes on DoD PKI.
Yeah, well, look, first let me go back to the kind of the question I think you were getting at, talking a little bit about the team, and that's something that's important to me, because this was an opportunity to bring in a government team of very talented engineers to start to crack the nut on how do we do derived credentials. And it's important to have that government team, because as much as we might want to go adopt new technology, a lot of what you want to shrink wrap and sell to the government is going to have proprietary stamped all over it. And I respect that. That's that market, protecting your standing in the market. But somewhere in that process, I've got to be able to have the technical authority, somebody who's got the credentials as engineers and scientists, who have the skills to have the laboratory environments to bust this stuff open, to send that into a government environment so that I can get that independent assessment from somebody not being pejorative of the commercial industry's motives or intent, but the very fact that as a part of being a civil servant and a government employee is being able to speak on behalf of the government. So the power of that group that was assembled, that Bill assembled, and that Rob, as a government person, was utilizing to challenge these derived credential solutions, to challenge these container solutions that we could use in an unclassified mobile environment, was really critical. So I think that goes to the question I think you were trying to ask, because we actually, with that government team, and it was out of SPAWAR, Navy's Space and Naval Warfare Systems Center in Charleston, and we brought industry in. We brought their solutions to the table, and we actually broke a couple of them, more than a couple of them.
More than a couple, yeah.
And it was a good feedback loop, because we went back to industry with what we found, and we said, hey, this is something we found as a way that this thing could be broken. Can you work on this? Can you fix this? And that's a process, as Bill points out, about 4 years that it took us to get to a point where we had a solution set that we could then begin a pilot. We actually take some funds and apply it against buying some devices and putting a solution out there and as a mobility as a solution, mobility as a service solution to begin to try to pilot this. The next stage becomes the working with the operator, because now you've got some workload that accrues to the people that have to go build the derived certificate and then provision that up into the cloud, and then checking to make sure that once I've downloaded the credential onto the device, it gets blown away in the cloud. So these are all things that the government has to validate. Right? So the power of that government team and that government laboratory system can't be underestimated. It was critical for us getting to where we're at. I did want to make a nod towards, the work that we're doing with DISA. This isn't the Marine Corps going off, plowing a path on its own. Certainly, we want to lean forward. We want to figure out solutions that make sense for us, that support the requirements that we have as an expeditionary force, as well as what we think makes sense from a garrison, and particularly from a bring your own device or a non-classified personal capability to get to organizational data. But that's always in concert with DISA and trying to go help them help us. One of the things that's really exciting to us right now is, as we've made progress on this derived credential pilot, is the work that DISA has been doing around how do you do the provisioning of that credential, which has turned out, as I just mentioned, the workload on the operator, the Marine Corps Operational Center, the McNOSC, and MAR4 Cyber now has become part of the discussion. If I get 60,000 personally owned BYO devices out there, that's a workload. Somebody's got to work those certificates, handle them appropriately, track where they've been issued to. That's a workload. So we're nugging through that, and some of the things that this is working on, I hope, will help us resolve some of that and make that really workable for us in that larger garrison environment, because I do think it's a game changer.
Thank you. Part of, I think, what keeps Greg up at night, what has kept Rob up at night and now keeps Ken up at night, is getting past the pilot stage. And part of what our group does, we're not just a PKI group, but we're a crypto group that works directly with NSA research on mainly hardware. Ton, Jack, and I, Crystal was a part of this, and we work in concert with NSA. We work in concert with Samsung at the moment to develop a use case similar to what Greg Kim has done, in order to have Ken look at it and say, okay, this looks good, this doesn't look good. Part of the question from the audience was, how does the government get past the pilot stage and move forward? We're out of time. It's slightly rhetorical. You can always grab one of us, and I'm sure Mr. Bible can address that. I'll help address that, and the rest of us. I know Henry has some great solutions for those types of problems. I want to thank the panel. These guys are great people, and we're grateful to be in the mix of supporting Mr. Bible and Greg, Kim, and elsewhere, especially in the Navy and Marine Corps, to solve these issues. And we're grateful to have the likes of Josh Dixon, Henry Jones, and Terry, and our good friends from Beam with some of these disruptive toys to further our approach to solving these problems. So thank you.
Bill, Mr. Bible, Josh, Henry, Terry, Dallas, grateful. These are subject matter experts. Don't get them talking too long, because you may not be able to stop the momentum. But gentlemen, thank you very much for your time today. Bill? Yeah. So we're going to take a 20-minute break instead of a 15-minute break to allow you to talk with the exhibitors in the hallway. Thank you very much, and we'll look back at 10:20 to see you back in the auditorium. Thank you. Oh, and Rob Anderson, thank you. Rob, thanks for your help, sir. Thanks, Randy. Absolutely, brother.